So we're taught this one lie our whole lives, and it's so baked in that most people don't even notice it's a belief and not a fact. Suffering only counts if it ends. Effort only matters if there's a finish line. If you fight and don't win, if you try and it doesn't resolve, your brain goes, well, that was pointless then. Now, if you watched JJK, you definitely know Nanami. If you didn't, he's basically a character who spent his entire life fighting a war that literally cannot be won. And somehow, despite never winning that war, he became one of the most respected characters in the series. Curses, which are the main antagonists in the show, don't run out. They're made of human negative energy, so they'll always be there. There's no visible end. He knew that going in. So why doesn't his story feel like a waste? Psychology has observed something called the goal gradient effect. We naturally become more motivated when we can see the finish line. When there isn't one, our brains often struggle to see the efforts as meaningful, which sounds fine until you realize the flip side. If there's no visible finish line, your brain treats the efforts as basically worthless. Not hard, but worthless. That's why in unwinnable situations such as a chronic illness, a toxic family thing you can't fully fix, a job that never actually gets done, feels so much heavier than something that's just difficult. It's not the difficulty wearing you down, it's the missing finish line. Think about video games. Even if a level is hard, you'll keep trying because you know there's a checkpoint, a boss, or a screen that says level complete. Your brain can see the finish line. Now compare that to living with chronic pain, recovering from addiction, raising a child. There's no congratulations, you're done. That's why those struggles feel so psychologically heavy. Not necessarily because they're harder, but because your brain never gets the reward of completion. This is literally the plot of a Greek myth, by the way. Sisyphus, the dude that gets cursed to push a boulder up a hill forever, gets to the top, it rolls back down, do it again, forever, no ending, ever. For many people, Sisyphus became the symbol of endless, pointless labor. Then Camus comes in and goes, wait, y'all are missing it. The point was never whether Sisyphus finishes the task. The point is how he pushes the boulder. His actual line is, one must imagine Sisyphus happy, which means he can have peace if he accepted the meaningless struggle and owned his fate. Not because the task got easier, because meaning was never supposed to come from the boulder reaching the top. It comes from him, from how he shows up to something that will never ever be finished. That's the whole reframe. Completion was never the metric. Relationship to the task was the metric the entire time. Okay, now, Nanami hated the endless grind of fighting curses so much that he literally quit and got a normal job. Hated that too, and went back to the curses again. That tells us the problem was never curse fighting specifically. He tried removing the boulder and was still miserable. So the fix couldn't be escape. It had to be something else. He treats the horror of his job, the demons, death, no end in sight, as overtime hours. It's funny actually. It's also Camus in a suit. He's not pretending the job doesn't suck. He's not waiting for it to win, so it'll finally mean something. He built his own private rule book, his own definition of doing it well, inside a task that was never going to resolve. That's the boulder pushing. That's the whole refrain happening in real time, in a guy complaining about work hours. So Nanami dies mid-fight. The war doesn't end. Curses are still out there. By every normal story logic rule, that's a tragedy. A hero dies, nothing resolved. Sadness. Except now we can see what actually happened. He was never fighting for an ending. He was fighting on his own terms. And that part, the terms, the way he carried it, doesn't die with him. That's the part that gets passed on. And look, you've probably got your own boulder, a body that doesn't cooperate, a situation that isn't getting fixed anytime soon, a version of a fight that just doesn't end. The reason that feels like a failure isn't because it is a failure. It's because you're grading it with the wrong rubric. We grew up on stories, and stories need endings to feel complete. The credits roll, the villain's dead, everyone lives happily ever after. So we quietly absorbed the idea that life works the same way, that the only proof something mattered is that it eventually stopped hurting. But that rule was borrowed from fiction. Real life was never running on that logic. So of course, it fails to make us feel complete or worthy if there's no end. That doesn't mean stop trying to fix what's fixable. It means stop treating still not fixed as evidence against you. And it's really easy to blur them when you're tired or overwhelmed. And of course, none of this means outcomes don't matter. Of course they do. I am one that seeks a destination. If your illness can be treated, seek treatment. If your relationship can be repaired, try to do so. If your goals are achievable, chase them and never give up on them. The point is that your efforts doesn't become meaningless just because the outcome is uncertain. Nanami didn't get a version where the war ends and he gets to rest. He got exactly one thing he actually controlled. It wasn't the outcome, just the terms, how he showed up to a thing that was never going to resolve. And that's the part of him that actually outlives him. The part Yuji picks back up, not a finished war, a way of carrying an unfinished one. Maybe that's what courage actually looks like, not finishing the impossible, just deciding how you'll carry it tomorrow. Because you don't control whether the hill disappears, you only control how you push. That's it.